The golden rays of the morning sun streamed through the expansive glass windows of the bustling airport terminal. Among the sea of hurried passengers, Mrs. Clara Turner stood with an air of quiet dignity. She was a woman in her late 70s, her posture upright, exuding grace and poise. Dressed in a modest yet elegant navy blue dress paired with a black cardigan, Clara was the epitome of timeless sophistication. Around her neck hung a pearl necklace, an heirloom she treasured dearly, a gift from her late husband. Her soft gray curls peeked out from beneath a dainty hat, completing her poised appearance. Today was no ordinary day for Clara. It was her first flight in years, a journey filled with both anticipation and nervousness. This trip carried immense emotional weight. It was her first visit to see her great-grandchildren, a reunion she'd been dreaming of for months. The thought of seeing their radiant smiles and hearing their cheerful laughter had kept her spirits high as she prepared for this journey. The decision to fly on a luxury airline was not Clara's own but her son's. He had insisted on providing her with the most comfortable travel experience. "Mom, you deserve the best," he'd said, gently persuading her to accept his thoughtful gift. Clara had hesitated at first, feeling that such extravagance was unnecessary, but her son's determination and love eventually convinced her. Now, standing in line at the gate, holding her boarding pass in her gloved hands, she felt a mix of gratitude and unease. As the boarding call echoed through the terminal, Clara adjusted the strap of her beloved leather handbag and moved forward with measured steps. This handbag, a cherished keepsake from her husband, held sentimental value far beyond its appearance. Each step she took was deliberate, her movement contrasting with the hurried pace of younger passengers around her. She glanced at her ticket again, row 2A. A slight smile formed on her lips, impressed by how close her seat was to the front of the plane. The boarding area was filled with sharply dressed individuals, many of whom gave Clara fleeting glances. She noticed the subtle stares, the faintly raised eyebrows, silent judgments she had grown accustomed to over the years. Clara had endured such moments throughout her life, and each time, she reminded herself to rise above them. Her resolve was firm. She would not let the opinions of others diminish her sense of worth. When her boarding group was called, Clara stepped forward and handed her ticket to the flight attendant at the gate. The woman, dressed impeccably in her airline uniform, scanned the ticket with a mechanical smile that barely reached her eyes. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am," the attendant said, her tone polite but distant. Clara nodded graciously and made her way down the jet bridge. Her heart fluttered with a blend of excitement and apprehension. As she stepped onto the aircraft, her eyes widened at the sight of its luxurious interior. The modern cabin, adorned with plush seats and gleaming finishes, was a world away from the cramped buses and long car rides she was accustomed to. She couldn't help but marvel at the comfort and elegance surrounding her, a rare treat in her otherwise simple life. Approaching her assigned seat, Clara paused to admire the spaciousness of the cabin. The window seat, bathed in soft light, seemed like a little haven of tranquility. Setting her handbag gently on the floor, she prepared to stow her carry-on luggage in the overhead bin. However, her hands trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the unfamiliarity of the task. Before she could manage, a sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am," came the stern tone of Lauren Mills, the lead flight attendant. Clara turned to face the tall, impeccably dressed woman whose expression was a mixture of professionalism and irritation. "Is this your seat?" Lauren asked, her voice clipped. "Yes, it is," Clara replied, holding up her boarding pass with a calm smile. Lauren scrutinized the ticket, her sharp gaze narrowing slightly. After a brief moment, she nodded curtly. "All right," she said flatly. "Please store your bag quickly so we can keep things moving." Clara's attempt to lift her bag into the compartment was interrupted by a kind passenger nearby. A middle-aged man with a warm demeanor stood up and offered assistance. "Let me help you, ma'am," he said, taking the bag from her trembling hands and effortlessly placing it in the overhead bin. "Thank you so much," Clara said, her gratitude genuine. The man's kindness, however, seemed to irritate Lauren, who crossed her arms and sighed audibly. "Let's not drag this out," she muttered under her breath, her tone sharp enough to draw attention from nearby passengers. Clara sat down in her seat, her composure intact despite the subtle hostility. She arranged her cardigan and rested her hands on her lap, focusing on the anticipation of seeing her great-grandchildren. But Lauren's icy demeanor lingered, casting a shadow over what should have been a joyful experience. Throughout the boarding process, Clara couldn't help but notice Lauren's frequent glances in her direction. The flight attendant's expression was unreadable, but far from welcoming. Clara chose to focus on the positive, recalling the stories she would share with her family and the joy awaiting her at the other end of this journey. However, the tension continued to build. As the cabin settled and passengers prepared for takeoff, Clara pressed the call button to request assistance with her seatbelt, which wasn't fastening properly. Lauren arrived moments later, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "What now?" Lauren asked, her voice laced with impatience. Clara maintained her calm demeanor and explained politely, "I'm sorry to trouble you, but I need a small cup of water to take my medicine." Lauren sighed dramatically. "We're not even in the air yet, ma'am. Water service doesn't begin until cruising altitude. You'll have to wait." Clara smiled gently, her voice steady. "It's just for my medicine. I promise I won't take up any more of your time." With another exaggerated sigh, Lauren stomped off toward the galley. Moments later, she returned and placed a plastic cup of water on Clara's table with a loud thud. The gesture was brusque, bordering on disrespectful, but Clara thanked her graciously, refusing to let the negativity dampen her spirits. As Clara settled back into her seat, she felt the weight of judgment around her, both from Lauren and from some of the other passengers. Yet, despite the disapproving glances and condescending attitude, she reminded herself of her strength. Little did anyone know, this quiet, elderly woman was about to spark a chain of events that would leave an indelible mark on the airline and everyone aboard. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Clara leaned back in her seat, determined to block out the tension in the air. Her heart was focused on the reunion waiting for her at the journey's end. The hugs of her great-grandchildren, their tiny arms wrapping around her with pure love. Yet, no matter how much she tried, the sharp glances and icy treatment from Lauren lingered in her mind like an uninvited shadow. Lauren, meanwhile, paced the aisle with an air of authority, her eyes darting occasionally toward Clara's seat. Her demeanor was cold and dismissive, as though Clara's very presence was an inconvenience. To those paying attention, it was clear that Lauren was singling Clara out, whether through sharp comments, exaggerated sighs, or her deliberately curt mannerisms. The tipping point came shortly after the plane reached cruising altitude. Clara, wanting to make herself as comfortable as possible, shifted slightly in her seat and adjusted her handbag under the chair in front of her. Lauren appeared almost instantly, her polished heels clicking against the floor as she stopped abruptly at Clara's row. "Ma'am," Lauren said, her tone sharp and condescending, "you need to keep your handbag fully under the seat at all times." Clara blinked, momentarily confused. She had already ensured the bag was securely tucked beneath the seat. "It is under the seat, dear," she replied gently, her voice steady and calm. Lauren glanced down, realizing her error. But instead of admitting her mistake, she doubled down. "Just make sure it stays there," she snapped. "I'll be checking." Nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A young woman across the aisle leaned toward Clara and whispered, "Don't worry about her, ma'am. You're not doing anything wrong." Her voice carried a tone of solidarity, and Clara flashed her a grateful smile. Despite her composed exterior, Clara felt the weight of the humiliation. Lauren's hostility wasn't just unprofessional. It was deeply personal. Each comment, each gesture seemed designed to diminish Clara, to make her feel unwelcome in this luxurious space. As meal service began, the situation escalated. Lauren returned to Clara's row, holding a tray of food with a forced smile that barely hid her irritation. "Here's your meal, ma'am," she said, placing the tray down with unnecessary force. The jarring movement caused Clara's water to spill slightly, droplets splashing onto her cardigan. "Oh dear," Clara said softly, reaching for a napkin. Before she could clean up the mess, Lauren rolled her eyes and grabbed a handful of napkins, tossing them onto the tray with a dismissive air. "Next time, be more careful," she muttered under her breath, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The young woman across the aisle frowned. "That was uncalled for," she said quietly, shaking her head. Clara remained silent, dabbing at her cardigan with the napkins. She had endured far worse indignities in her life, but something about Lauren's behavior stung deeply. It wasn't just the hostility. It was the public nature of it, the way Lauren seemed intent on making Clara a target for everyone to see. As the flight progressed, Lauren's behavior became more erratic. She ignored Clara's polite requests, choosing instead to focus her attention on the wealthier, more influential-looking passengers. When Clara pressed the call button to ask for a blanket, Lauren arrived with an exaggerated sigh. "We're out of blankets," she said curtly, even as Clara noticed other passengers receiving them moments later. It was clear to everyone that Lauren had singled Clara out. Some passengers watched in discomfort, unsure of how to intervene. Others pretended not to notice, unwilling to involve themselves in the growing tension. But one man, a middle-aged businessman sitting a few rows behind Clara, had seen enough. "Excuse me," he said, standing up as Lauren passed by. His voice was firm but polite. "I couldn't help but notice how you've been treating this lady. Is there a problem here?" Lauren froze, her professional mask slipping slightly. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her tone defensive. "I'm simply enforcing the rules." "The rules?" the man repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're singling her out for no reason." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Several passengers nodded in agreement, their earlier silence breaking as they began to voice their disapproval. "Yeah, she's been rude to her since the start," the young woman across the aisle chimed in. "I noticed it too," another passenger added. "It's unacceptable." Lauren's face flushed with embarrassment as the voices grew louder. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the businessman raised a hand. "We're all paying customers here," he said firmly. "This woman deserves the same respect as anyone else on this plane." Clara, who had been quietly observing the exchange, felt a swell of gratitude. She placed a hand on her chest, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. The confrontation marked a turning point. Lauren, visibly flustered, retreated to the galley, leaving the other flight attendants to manage the rest of the service. Passengers continued to murmur among themselves, their solidarity with Clara clear. What no one realized, however, was that this incident was only the beginning. The moment the plane landed, the businessman approached Clara and introduced himself. "Mrs. Turner," he said with a warm smile, "my name is Richard Carter. I'm a journalist, and I'd like to write about what happened here today." Clara hesitated, unsure of how to respond. But as Richard explained his intentions, to shine a light on discrimination and mistreatment, she felt a spark of courage. By the next day, Clara's story had gone viral. News outlets picked up the article, and social media erupted with outrage. The luxury airline faced intense backlash, with calls for an investigation into Lauren's behavior. Within hours, the airline's CEO issued a public apology, promising to address the incident and ensure it would never happen again. But the most surprising twist came when Clara received a call from the airline itself. The CEO, deeply moved by her story, offered her a lifetime membership to their premium class and announced a new initiative in her honor, a program dedicated to improving inclusivity and customer care. Lauren, meanwhile, was promptly suspended pending a full review. Her actions had not only embarrassed the airline but also served as a powerful reminder of the importance of respect and kindness. As Clara reflected on the events of the past 24 hours, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as a painful encounter had transformed into a moment of triumph, a testament to the strength of dignity and the power of standing up for what is right. Her journey to visit her great-grandchildren had turned into something much larger, a story that would inspire countless others to believe in the value of compassion, no matter the circumstances.